Good morning and welcome to the Marin Economic Briefing. My name is Mike Blakeley and I'm the CEO of the Marin Economic Forum. The Marin Economic Forum is a nonprofit public benefit organization that provides data, research, and strategy development in support of Marin County's economic vitality. You can find out more about our work and make sure that you're invited to future events like this by visiting our website at marineconomicforum.org. So the Marin Economic Briefing is something that we developed several months ago in order to help the community understand the economic impacts of the coronavirus pandemic. We do that by analyzing data, key economic indicators at the national, state, and of course at the local level. And we use that data to try not only to understand the impacts, but to also think about considerations for our own economic recovery here in Marin County. To help me do that, I'm joined by our chief economist, Dr. Rob Eyler, who's going to walk us through the data. And then as usual, I'll summarize what we are seeing and our own analysis and what we think that the community needs to be aware of as we go forward during this pandemic. This event is being recorded, so if you did register, you can expect a link from us later today to watch the recording, and we definitely appreciate if you push that out to your friends and colleagues. And as usual, we're always open for comments and feedback on these to make sure that we can keep them as a useful resource for all of you. We are going to keep this short. It's going to be 30 minutes. If we have time after, we certainly will try to entertain questions. So if you do have questions, I recommend you put them in the chat box. We'll do our best to get to them. And without further ado, I'm going to turn this over to Rob. And Rob, take us through what's going on out there.
Thanks, Mike, and thanks everybody for coming today. To provide a quick overview, the national and state level, we've seen unemployment moderate a little bit in November with respect to the national jobs numbers. They came out last Friday. We're about 6.7% unemployment, still a little bit over 9 million people out of work as of November 30. We have a lot of concerns at the state level. We have seen consistent jobs recovery since the summer ended in California, but with COVID cases rising and stay-at-home orders starting to roll out through the state, we are expecting our state level jobs recovery to moderate somewhat as well. And those, in some parts, as I'll show you in a second, are starting to affect the way forecasters are looking at not only the next few quarters, but the next few years slightly. The next few years have more or less the same forecast because the supposition is 2021 will be a transition year for the entire United States economy, including California. But the evolution of the labor market after the 1st of January is likely to be much slower than what we've seen in the last 6 months. Now, for Marin County specifically, jobs growth continues locally. Marin County is now down to an unemployment rate of 5.4% as of the end of October, and those are the latest data. The new jobs numbers will come out late next week. California is at 9%, and again, we're not expecting much change in November, and if there is a change, it's going to be relatively small. The housing prices remain steady, and forecasts look really good through most of 2021, so on the housing wealth side, that's a good thing. On the lack of affordability side of housing, that's another policy issue that's going to creep up as we recover in our economy. But from an economic development standpoint, probably the largest issue at this point is trying to find out whether or not we're seeing major business losses and in what industries. So that's a key consideration going forward and what we're trying to monitor alongside of those job changes. Now, the next stage I'm going to show you is the continued claims for unemployment insurance at the US level. So economists have shifted away from looking at new unemployment insurance claims, or so-called initial claims, and now looking at the total amount that are being claimed as a way of watching the labor market evolve. So these data are from the beginning of this year through about the middle part of November, so about 3 weeks old now. And you can see these are the US data. So since the beginning of May, the US economy has actually started its labor market recovery. And I'll just give you a quick hint that a lot of this is because we saw temporary job losses be the main way in which people lost their jobs initially. And that's now starting somewhat to convert alongside of people getting their jobs back to permanent job losses. The other issue here is the speed at which things are recovering. So while we saw a pretty good gradient at the beginning of the recovery and sort of continued through the summer at the national level, you'll notice at the far right-hand side of this graph that it's starting to curl a little bit, which suggests that the amount of people coming off unemployment insurance versus going on is starting to slow down a little bit. And that's really how to read these data. This is the net change in the total number of people that are receiving unemployment insurance. This is California's data in contrast. So when you look at these data, you can see that for California, we had sort of a similar and almost earlier spike than the US did. We saw a little bit more moderation initially, but then we saw a relative flat movement over the summer, which suggested that the number of people in California that were being paid unemployment insurance was basically equal to those going off, which did not give us a whole lot of jobs momentum really going into the beginning of summer. And that sort of lingered around through most of summer. A lot of this is because the Los Angeles metro area has been very hurt by this pandemic recession, and it really has not seen as quick a jobs recovery as other parts of the United States and other parts of California. But that started to change in September, and you can see that it started to catch on to basically the same gradient, if you will, as the US, but it's also starting to curl a little bit. So economists are starting to be worried that because of COVID cases rising, as we've entered the later part of fall and the beginning of winter, and also the lack of a fiscal spending package, we won't see as quick a jobs recovery. And those two issues are starting to affect forecasts for the American economy, which are shown here. The Philadelphia Federal Reserve every quarter does a survey of 40 forecasters, and I'm showing you here their median forecast for real GDP growth, so thinking about income growth in the American economy after inflation, and the unemployment rate. And those two are naturally linked in macroeconomics. And these data also show the payroll jobs growth, but those data are extremely violent in reality. And so those kind of just are connected to the other two data points here on this slide. But what I want to show you is really, and what's more important, is how these forecasters are seeing the next 4 quarters and really the next few years. So this is GDP growth, and the first column is the last quarter's forecast, and the second column is the new forecast. And you'll notice that for the next few quarters, those forecasts have moderated from the previous quarter. COVID cases have gone up faster than we expected, and we're waiting for a congressional package that has not come yet. On the unemployment side, however, the jobs market has actually outpaced forecasters' original takes, and notice that they've actually shown more jobs growth. So the third quarter way out performed the original forecast for the third quarter, and now forecasts are sort of rejiggering, if you will, their forecast for the next few quarters with respect to how well the third quarter performed. And the third quarter performance has led to a lot better jobs growth than we expected. But notice, over the next few quarters, the descent of the unemployment rate is slowing down. So instead of going from 11% to 9% to 7% in successive months, we're now going to go from 7% to 6.5 to 6.3 to 6.1 over the next few quarters. And we expect that recessions generally, as we go from recession into recovery, have those kind of characteristics that you just are not going to have this wild so-called V-shaped recovery. At some point, permanent job losses really start to seize up the labor markets with respect to slowing down ultimate jobs recovery. And with a lot of uncertainty still in the marketplace, that's not a shocker. Here's the next few years, according to these forecasters. They're expecting a negative year this year with pretty decent growth the next couple of years, and the unemployment rate to continue to go down over the next few years. But notice where it is in that very bottom right-hand side of that final rectangle, 4.6% at the end of 2023. Now, what does that mean? That means we're not going to quite be back to where we started this year, probably until the end of 2023 and perhaps 2024, according to these forecasters. And most economists are in the range of saying early 2023 to early 2024, we should be at a capacity level of the economy, basically GDP level and labor market level, where we started 2020. So that's 3 to 4 years of basically not a lot of change in the economy in terms of actual growth, or the hole that will be left by COVID-19 nationally. Other forecasts are all over the place. The IMF is relatively similar to these. The New York Fed, who has a similar forecasting team, is actually a little bit more pessimistic about the fourth quarter, and actually over the next couple of years is a little more pessimistic. The Atlanta Fed, that was very close to the actual third quarter growth rate for the US, is much more optimistic. And so one of the things I want to show you here is that we have a lot of professionals on the job here trying to see where the American economy is going, but they are all over the place as to what the actual forecast may or may not be. A lot of uncertainty in the markets, but all these data point to the next couple of years as being continuous recovery periods, but not a so-called V-shaped recovery. It's going to be more like a modified V, where right-hand leg of the V is starting to flatten a little bit. And a lot of that's because we do not have that sort of combination between continued fiscal policy assistance and a reduction of cases. The vaccines coming coming to us and having general efficacy will clean up a lot of the worry probably in the recovery period, but it's still critical that the vaccines hit the street and we start to all believe that the end is near. Okay, let's now talk about Marin County with some context looking at the state level data as well. Here's the same data I showed you a couple slides ago that are continued claims for unemployment insurance, or the total number of weeks that we're paying people for unemployment insurance each month. The data look very similar, but I want to show you some of the contrast regionally and also against the American level data. This is Marin County. You can see the big spike, and summer had some recovery for local residents in terms of them coming on and off of unemployment insurance, but it's really only after September that things have really started to move down in earnest. This is Napa County, San Francisco County, so the city has had a little bit more of a struggle getting out of the labor market issues. Solano County, Mendocino County, thinking of the more rural aspects of the North Bay. Sonoma County, relatively consistent, but still relatively high. California, right through the middle. This also suggests that if you take our region as a whole, it really is a microcosm of the state economy. And there's the US. So the last two graphs on this slide were basically what I showed you before, but it suggests that from a residential standpoint, we still have people lingering on unemployment insurance. And there's a lot of stories running around as to why people are still on unemployment. Maybe they're there by choice, meaning they could take another job. They permanently lost their job. They haven't been re-offered a job, and they have childcare issues at home, and they're utilizing unemployment insurance basically as a subsidy to stay home because they don't have a childcare option and their school is not open yet in terms of them going back and the kids are at home online. So those things are going to evolve over the next year, but we need all these data to start trending down to see true regional labor market recovery. Here are some more focal data with respect to the labor market data for Marin County versus the state. A couple key items here. I already kind of told you this in the first slide. 5.4% unemployment for October 2020 in Marin County, 9.0% or right at 9% for the state. But the key factor is really how many people are still out of work. So that second line, which is civilian civilian employment, still 7,800 people that live in Marin County who had a job last October, don't have their job back yet. And for the state overall, about 1.2 million people still out of work from 1 year ago. So we need these numbers to get closer and closer to zero, obviously, but it might take some time. And this is, again, thinking about the speed of recovery. If we do not get jobs to come back, it's probably because businesses have been destabilized by this. If you can't open, you can't generate revenue, you can't rehire if you let people go. And so we have to get to the other side of the vaccine efficacy and getting it out there and really reducing all that uncertainty. Another parallel piece to that are there's specific industries that are hurt. And that's something we're going to now look at in terms of the change in jobs in Marin County with respect to specific industry employers. So one of the characteristics of this recession is looking at how it's evolved in terms of where the initial job losses took place and then where the recovery has been. Here's April. So in the labor market issues did not really seize up most of the North Bay, and Marin County being a microcosm of that, until after April. So notice in April, with respect to what it looked like in percentage terms 1 year before. So these data are suggesting you look at the month 1 year before, what's the percentage change in the number of people employed in that industry? That's April. Now, May is when the pain took place. Notice all those negative numbers. Then recovery started slowly coming. There's June, July, August, September, and then October. But notice in September, I'm going to click back one slide or one little click here. In September, we saw a little bit of a kickback, and some of that happened because the summer, as I showed you earlier, was a time where we were starting to see a buildup again of social constraints, and it started to affect a little bit of the jobs recovery. But in October, we got a little bit more momentum, which is good. Three things to point out on this graph that are critical. One, if you look at the far right-hand side, about the last third, you'll see two industries that had recovery, but are still very much hurt. That's leisure and hospitality and other services. Still very large percentage changes from 1 year ago. 3 out of 10 people who had a job last October in leisure and hospitality, bars, restaurants, hotels, out of work. 1 in 5 in other services, which is an array of hair salons, nail salons, and nonprofit organizations. Still large labor losses historically. The second is there is general recovery across most of the industries. So Marin County's relatively low unemployment rate is a reflection of residents and how they're getting their jobs back. This is a reflection of who works in Marin County to give you a contrast. So this might be affecting folks in Solano County, Contra Costa County, Sonoma County, Napa County, as well as Marin County. And so you got to think that when you have local jobs changes, it can have regional effects. The third thing is that when the second one, which is total non-farm, still 8.4% down from 1 year ago. So we still got a ways to go to get our workers back into Marin County. And a lot of that's because the services industries are still relatively seized up, including some of our tourism assets. And that is slowing down ultimate economic recovery in Marin County and other parts of California. So while the numbers look good on the surface, there are some concerns, and Mike will address some of those things later. This is a way of looking at the job losses in terms of the proportion. And so this is something we're watching because those data can kind of hide how much the pain is being felt by specific industry groups. So 30% of the current the current job losses of employers in Marin County are being borne by leisure and hospitality businesses, another 20 in retail, another 10 in other services. So you add all those up and almost 60% of the jobs that have been lost at Marin County employers are being borne by three industry groups that have relatively low wage workers historically and may have structural change in them where the jobs are not going to easily come back. Speaking of hospitality, Marin County has actually done relatively well with respect to occupancy rates. So while we've seen San Francisco get absolutely hammered, and you can see at the end of October, the occupancy rate in San Francisco was 33.7% of the available hotel rooms rather than 88.6%, which was the case 1 year ago. And that leads to some real revenue challenges for hoteliers and ultimately for all the secondary and tertiary related businesses, thinking in concentric circles around hotels. People fly into the city, then they have people stay overnight. They have bars and restaurants, retail, all feel that positive effect. And then regionally, Napa, Sonoma, Marin counties all feel that effect as people cross the bridges and come into wine country or go to the coast. When those folks are not coming in, everything slows down. And this is really a reflection of how regional the effects of the travel constraints have been on the tourism economies. I want to show you some data that comes out of the Workforce Alliance for the North Bay. I'm proud to say I'm on that board, and a couple of things have come out over the last quarter to look at job postings. So 64% of new job postings that have been out there as of the third quarter have no minimum experience required. So that leads to some concerns about workforce development and where we really need to have training, because if 2/3 of the jobs don't need any experience, it's tough to train for those jobs. But it also suggests where jobs growth is happening. It's happening in probably relatively low skill services, just trying to get goods and services out to people. The next slide I want to show you is the top hard skills are merchandising, warehousing, nursing. So we're seeing some of these skills, which are potentially good things for institutions like College of Marin to start gearing up for training and providing an asset parallel to the job search for folks looking to get back to work. So we're watching the way in which the job market is evolving, not only on the demand side, which I just showed you, but also on the supply side. Who's out there ready for work, and are they picking up those jobs that are being available? Commercial real estate is a big question mark in terms of how we're going to see things move forward. These are the data coming out of Newmark, Knight, and Frank as of the end of Q3. And you can see the biggest shocker here is probably at the very bottom, where there's very little under construction and not a whole lot being delivered to market. And a lot of the rest of it's not probably that shocking, but what we're hearing on the street is there's a lot of tire kicking by businesses that are looking now to start operations back sometime in the summer 2021 and potentially move down in price point with respect to what they can negotiate as the office space market evolves. We also hear on the street that some businesses are starting to look at Marin County in terms of demanding space because their workers are going to remain portable and they're going to put sort of ancillary space for gathering, but we'll watch all that play out. This suggests that things have not gotten desperate because it's relatively flat or very small changes in most of the key indicators for commercial real estate, but we're watching this all very, very closely. To wrap up on my end, I want to show you this graph, which is probably the most important meta level issue with respect to how the COVID-19 recovery is happening from the original recession, and that is this. We have seen a large number of small businesses potentially not remaining open. And it's critical that you see it in that way. Harvard University is partnering with the Gates Foundation to basically track the number of small businesses with under 500 employees, but in places like Marin County, that really is almost all businesses. We should be thinking businesses under 25 workers. And how many of those have remained open? Well, for the San Francisco Metro Bay area, the whole 9 counties basically, about 42% of all businesses under 500 workers are currently not open. Now we don't know whether they are permanently closed or just temporarily not open, but it suggests that 42% of the economy is basically shut off in the metro area, with about 60% of leisure and hospitality businesses being shut off. And that's as of about 3 weeks ago, according to these data. Now, these data are using big data. They're using social media sites and how many businesses have advertised in early 2020 versus not now, and trying to cobble together from a bunch of different data sets what businesses are remaining open or not. The key here is that these numbers are relatively historic and shocking, and it leads to a natural economic development challenges. Where do we put our economic development resources to salvage businesses, and furthermore, to think about what we're going to see with respect to the overall capacity of the economy to rehire workers as 2021 and 2022 evolve? Leisure and hospitality, as I showed you earlier, and an array of other services are really at most threat, but retail is also, and we might see some structural changes that might shock you, but it is something to watch very closely as recovery looks good on one side, but on the side of if you're a business owner, things might get really weird, especially if the stay-at-home orders linger on longer than we expect. I'm going to hand it back over to Mike now, and he's going to talk to you about some of the bigger issues that we're watching at Marin Economic Forum.
Thanks so much, Rob. And before I start with my remarks, I just want to come back to you real quick. I think we're hearing at the national level a different discourse in terms of if the country is actually in a recession by technical terms, or are we moving into recovery? And the data that you just presented there, well, I mean, what does it suggest to you? Should we be using the term recession, or should we be using the term recovery?
We should be using the term recovery, because all indicators point that we are actually out of what you can think of as the core recession issues. We just need to have it declared, but for the most part, economists agree that we're now very much in recovery and not necessarily in a current recession anymore.
Okay, and that's a very important question for all of us to understand, because from our perspective here at MEF, since the beginning of this, we've been looking at how are we going to get out of it. And so when we look at this data and in our day-to-day work, when we're talking about economic recovery, really the question we're asking is, what do we know, and then what do we have to fix? And we try to unpack that into these 3 areas here: workforce, business sectors, and commercial real estate, and restoring and growing the economy. So let me just touch on a few of the things that we're seeing here. So when we look at our workforce, obviously the data that Rob just presented, really tells a story. We have a lot of personal services types businesses here. That is where the job loss, over 60%, has occurred. We know that those jobs are filled traditionally by our lower skilled residents. And so it's really an alarming sign that the majority of job openings at this time are in categories of jobs where no experience is required. It's alarming because it doesn't seem to present a lot of economic opportunity for our residents in terms of jobs, but it's also alarming in the bigger picture of what our economy looks like and what kind of jobs and businesses we have. And it also is concerning because Marin County, frankly, does not have a large number of major employers that would have jobs across all skill levels, particularly high skilled levels. So even though we've made a shift to remote work, it still means for those residents that are with higher skills, they're going to have to continue to look outside the county for employment. When we look at different business sectors in the commercial real estate market, Rob already touched on the fact that what we're hearing from commercial real estate brokers is they are seeing an uptick in the number of tours. That's a sign that activity is picking up. They've also confirmed for us, as Rob said, that a lot of companies, and I see this at the national level as well, are talking about a potential return to the office in summer. So if you backtrack from that, that means people need to start looking at that now. So that's a space we really have to watch. Early on, there was a lot of prognostication about the death of office buildings and how are we going to reuse the office space in Marin County, but we're not seeing any evidence yet that it should be, that we're going to see pain and suffering in that sector. In fact, we hope that it continues to uptick, and we actually hope that we see companies leaving urban centers for places like Marin County. I think it's clear from the events of last week with the new shelter-in-place reimposed that our smallest businesses and those that are customer-facing and in the personal services sector, it's going to be like a pendulum that swings back and forth in terms of their ability to recover from this, to stay open, to restore the jobs that they had, and to hopefully themselves keep their doors open. Let's all hope that the measures taken by the public officials will allow us to get over the next hurdle, and that as we look at the beginning of 2021, we can start building up and not have a situation where we're going to have to shut down again. But in the short term, in fact, the immediate term, I think it's going to be a case of these businesses, having to do what they can to survive, step by step by step, in a very incremental way of taking it, such as the holiday season to the spring, etc. And finally, the point that I wanted to dwell on a little bit longer here is this notion of restoring and growing our economy. So last week I had the opportunity to be a part of something called the California Economic Summit. And there was a really important presentation given there by an academic at USC who made the observation that some of you may have seen before, that indeed we're not in a recession in the traditional sense, where at the macro level, you're seeing a decrease in employment across the board, you're seeing a decrease in revenues across the board, seeing a decrease in asset prices across the board. That is actually not the case. What you're seeing is a more targeted micro recession that is impacting certain segments of the population. And that is exactly the case here in Marin County. The data that was presented is that the stock market is doing great. So if you hold assets there, you're not facing recessionary characteristics. If you're a homeowner, prices in Marin County are up by over 9%. You're not facing recessionary characteristics. If you have a job with a salary of $100,000 or more, you've more than likely been able to pivot to remote work. You're not facing a recession. And then finally, those individuals that aren't able, the affluent individuals that aren't able to spend money because things are closed or they can't travel, are actually saving. Then you have the entire other end of the spectrum of low income residents that have lost their jobs, that are facing an uncertain future. And so we really have to, when we're talking about coming out of this and recovery in Marin County, we've really got to look at that segment of the population that is facing incredible hardship at this time. And so it's not about we're in a recession, how do we get out of it? It's that we've got micro targeted recessions. How do our interventions, both policy and financial going forward, going to address that segment of our population? And then the last point that I'll make is that business attraction is going to be critical for a number of reasons. First and foremost, as I already mentioned, we have a lot of high-skilled residents that need to leave the county because we don't have that critical mass of high-skilled jobs here. And I think that that's something that's going to need to change for a lot of good reasons. We want to give our local residents access here, but also there's a unique opportunity right now, given this de-densification of urban centers by businesses, to really present Marin County as a viable and great place to put your business. We have a workforce here that is generally leaves the county, would love to stay here, but we also want to create the type of jobs that give our lower skilled residents a pathway towards more middle skilled jobs. And the first thing that you should know about economic growth is it occurs not by restoring jobs you've lost, but by job creation. So we're going to have to look longer term. What is our strategy for job creation in Marin County? So I'm going to leave it there because we are at time. I see that there are a number of questions and comments in the chat. Some of them are being answered by Rob directly. Again, I want to thank everybody for attending. This is the first one of these briefings where we've had over 100 participants. That's a proud moment for MEF. We really appreciate your participation. We also welcome your feedback. If there's something that you're seeing in these briefings that you think would improve them, please feel free to reach out to us. As I mentioned, we are going to have a link to the video recording of this later. We will probably have our next briefing in the month of January. So until that time, please stay safe, please shop local, and please continue to watch for what our economy is going to be doing coming out of this and how we make it stronger than before. Thanks again, everybody, for tuning in. Have a great holiday. We'll see you at the next one.